Retire at age 53, and most retirement calculators will quietly stop doing their job because they were built around a 65-year-old with a 25 to 30-year finish line. Shave 12 years off the front end, and you are not just retiring early. You are running the hardest stress test a retirement plan can ever face. Because the number one cost, climbing faster than everything else in your budget, lands hardest in exactly those extra years. And the cost is health insurance. And right now, in 2026, it is behaving worse than it has in years. I'm Brett Fellows with Oak Capital Advisors. So here is where the trouble starts. The 4% rule, the one most retirement calculators lean on heavily. This rule was built for a specific shape of retirement. You naturally take 4% of your portfolio in year number one, and you increase that dollar amount every year for inflation. And then, historically, your money holds up for over a 30-year stretch. And that is the whole model. Now, it was stress tested against a 30-year window because most people who use it retire somewhere around age 65. But if you retire at 53 instead, and the math changes underneath you, and live to 88, which is not an aggressive assumption for a healthy 53-year-old, and all of a sudden the plan now needs 35 years of income, not 30. And that is not a stretch either. A 65-year-old woman today can expect to live to roughly age 87 on average, and about a third of today's 65-year-olds will live past age 90. So retire at age 53 and living into your late 80s or 90s is not the exception. It is close to the middle of the range. And some calculator that was built around a 25 to 30-year horizon was never actually tested that far out. And so it ran out of room to check its own work well before the plan would need it to. Now that gap between 25 to 30 years and 35 plus years would be a problem on its own. But inflation makes it worse because the calculator almost always assumes one flat inflation rate applied evenly across the entire budget. So groceries, travel, your mortgage, health insurance, all are inflating at the same proverbial 2.5 or 3% a year. Now that is a very simple assumption, and it is also wrong, and it has been wrong for a long time. Medical care prices do not move at the same pace as everything else. Since the year 2000, the price of medical care, including all services, insurance, and drugs, has risen, listen to this, 121%, while prices for all other consumer goods and services over that same stretch rose 86%. So that is not just a rounding error. That is decades of one line in the budget quietly outrunning every other line year after year, compounding on itself the entire time. For someone retiring at age 65 with Medicare starting the same year, that gap is real, but frankly, it's pretty manageable because Medicare, IRMA brackets, and Medigap premiums absorb some of it. But for someone retiring at age 53, there is no Medicare yet. So there are instead 12 years for which you need to bridge. And during those 12 years, health coverage usually means one thing: a private marketplace plan purchased at full price with no employer chipping in. Now, it helps to understand why medical costs tend to outrun general prices in the first place, instead of treating it as some unexplained force. Healthcare is very labor heavy, and wages for nurses, technicians, and specialists tend to rise quite steadily. New treatments, new devices, and prescription drugs enter the market at premium prices before competition then brings the cost down, if it ever does at all. And hospital systems have consolidated in many regions, which reduces price competition. And on top of that, an aging population is using more care, which therefore pushes demand and prices higher. So none of that is going to go away anytime soon. And none of it moves at the same pace as our rent or our groceries. So this is not only a story about someone who has $1.8 million portfolio and retiring at age 53. The same math applies to anyone leaving full-time work before age 65. Again, whether that's at 55, 58, or 60, it doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter whether the portfolio is larger or smaller. Your bridge might be 5 years instead of 12. The dollar amounts will look different to you, but the pattern will not. So any retirement that starts before Medicare eligibility involves a stretch of years where healthcare is the fastest growing and least flexible line in the budget. And it is also where a single blended inflation rate will understate the real number every time. Now let's make this concrete with a hypothetical. Picture a 53-year-old retiree. We will call her Colleen. Colleen is retiring with a $1.8 million portfolio. So she runs the math using the standard 4% rule. So 4% of $1.8 million equals $72,000 a year. And she plugs that into a generic online calculator, and that tells her that she is fine. Gives her the green light, her plan is complete, she can go on. But look closer at what makes up that $72,000. Colleen and her spouse are buying health coverage on the ACA marketplace. There's no employer subsidy, so she has to pay full retail. So their premiums run $28,000 a year. Well, that leaves $44,000 for everything else, like housing, food, travel, or the rest of life. So here's the assumption almost every generic calculator makes. It takes that $72,000 and grows the whole number by one inflation rate. And again, usually it's somewhere around 3%. And it will do this for every year of the plan. Now, run that forward 10 years. $72,000 growing at 3% annually, and you land at roughly $96,800. And that is what the tool shows Colleen. It shows a steady, predictable climb. So still, on paper, everything looks affordable to her. Now split her spending rate into two lines instead of one, the way an actual bridge year plan should. First, grow the $44,000 in ordinary living expenses at a general inflation rate of 3% a year. Then grow the $28,000 health insurance premium at a medical inflation rate of 6% a year, which is roughly in line with what medical costs have done relative to general prices over time. And then run both of these forward 10 years. Well, the ordinary spending line grows to about $59,100, while the health insurance line, growing twice as fast, grows to about $50,100. And then we'll do some math, we'll add them together, and Colleen's real 10-year spending need is close to $109,000 a year, not $96,800, and nowhere near the $72,000 the calculator first showed on her as fine. So that is nearly $37,000 a year higher than the number that got her the green light. And it happens by year 10 of a 35-year retirement, with the gap still widening every year after that. So this is not a market risk on its own, but it becomes one very quickly. A retirement plan that quietly needs $37,000 a year more than it expected is a plan pulling harder on the portfolio than it was designed to. And if you pull harder in the early years of retirement, especially if those years include a market downturn and the portfolio has less left to recover with later, well, that is the classic sequence of returns risk, and an understated healthcare number makes it worse without anyone noticing. Because again, the spreadsheet still says that you are on track right until it does not. And there is a behavioral piece here too, and it is worth naming plainly. Once a calculator says that you are fine, guess what? Most people stop checking it. So the number becomes an anchor. Now, Colleen is not careless for trusting a $72,000 figure that a tool handed her. She is, of course, human, but health insurance is not a category that she can trim the way she might cut back on in, say, travel or dining out in a rough year. Because healthcare, it is fixed and it is contractual, and it renews every single year whether the market cooperated or not. So treating a non-discretionary, fast-growing expense the same way you would treat a flexible one is where a lot of otherwise well-built retirement plans quietly come apart. And then there is a second layer to this, and it is especially relevant in 2026. For years now, enhanced ACA premium subsidies were able to cap what higher earners paid for marketplace coverage. And the strict income cliff that used to cut off subsidies entirely above a 400% level of the federal poverty was effectively suspended. Well, guess what? That suspension expired at the end of 2025. So the old cliff is back for 2026, and it returned exactly the way it worked before 2021. So if you cross the income line and subsidies do not phase out then gradually, they disappear completely. So for a two-person household, 400% of the federal poverty level for 2026, for marketplace plans, this works out to about $84,600 of modified adjusted gross income for the year, based on 2025 federal poverty guidelines. So if you earn $1 more than that, and a retired couple buying their own coverage can lose their entire subsidy at once. This does not happen gradually. Now, real reporting on this cliff has already shown couples in their 50s and 60s seeing their marketplace premiums jump by hundreds or even thousands of dollars a month once they cross that line, depending on their state and age. So Colleen's full price of $28,000 premium is not a stretched hypothetical for this video. It is close to what real 2026 marketplace pricing looks like for a couple her age buying coverage without a subsidy. Here's a simplified, illustrated version of how sharp that cliff can actually feel. So suppose a couple like Colleen's, with modified adjusted gross income at $83,000 for the year. Well, that qualifies for a subsidy that brings her premium down to somewhere in the neighborhood of $700 to $900 a month. Now, nudge that same household's income to over $86,000, just $1,400 over the $84,600 threshold, and the subsidy does not shrink for them gradually, it disappears completely. And now the couple is suddenly paying full price, which recent 2026 marketplace data shows can run well over $2,000 a month for a couple in their late 50s or 60s in a number of states. So a $1,400 difference in income can translate into tens of thousands of dollars a year in lost subsidy. And that, my friends, is the cliff. So this changes what managing income in retirement means for someone in Colleen's position. It is not only about them paying less in taxes. It is about watching modified adjusted gross income closely enough every single year of the bridge to Medicare. Because you want to stay under that 400% threshold if staying under it is the better move for your household. So that means being very deliberate about which account you pull from. Traditional IRA withdrawals and Roth conversions, will they count toward modified adjusted gross income? But Roth withdrawals and money from a taxable brokerage account funded with already taxed dollars generally do not add to that number in the same way. So here's what it actually looks like in practice. Say Colleen needs an extra $8,000 one year for a generic home repair, and her modified adjusted gross income is already sitting close to the $84,600 line. Well, pull that $8,000 from a traditional pre-tax IRA, and she may cross the threshold and then, of course, lose her subsidy for the entire year, not just on the extra income, but on the full premium. But if she pulled the same $8,000 from a Roth account or a taxable brokerage account instead, and there her modified adjusted gross income may not move at all. So the dollar amount she needed is identical, but the consequence is not. And you can see that it could easily run into thousands of dollars, depending, of course, on her age, her state, and her specific plan. So the order Colleen draws from her accounts is no longer just a tax question. It is also a health insurance subsidy question, and getting it wrong by even a small amount can mean losing a meaningful subsidy all at once or repaying subsidy already received when tax season comes, since there is currently no cap on how much excess subsidy needs to be repaid. Now, none of this disappears once Colleen turns age 65 and Medicare starts. It just changes its shape. So the $28,000 market-based premium goes away. That's good. It's now replaced by Medicare Part B premiums, Part D premiums, and either a Medigap policy or a Medicare Advantage plan, plus whatever Colleen spends out of pocket. Now for 2026, the standard Medicare Part B premium is $202.90 per month per person, and income-related surcharges, known as IRMA, they begin adding to that once modified adjusted gross income crosses roughly $218,000 for a married couple filing jointly, with total Part B premiums for higher earners running as high as $689.90 per month per person. So the threshold sits much higher, as you can see, than the ACA marketplace cliff. So it usually matters less during the Medicare years than it does during the bridge. but it is still income sensitive. And the habit of watching modified adjusted gross income does not stop being useful just because the calendar turned you to age 65. And the scale of the number does not shrink either. Fidelity Investments publishes an annual retiree healthcare cost estimate. And its most recent figures put total healthcare costs for an average 65-year-old couple across the rest of their retirement at more than a total of $300,000, which would cover premiums, deductibles, and copays. Now, that number has climbed almost every year since Fidelity started publishing it. And it does not include long-term care coverage, which tends to become a real possibility later in retirement, and which, of course, has its own history of costs rising faster than the general inflation. So if you stretch a plan to 35 years or more, well, the odds of needing some form of long-term care somewhere in that window naturally go up meaningfully. So a retirement plan that only accounts for the premiums and prescriptions and never builds in room for any type of care later in life really is still only telling you part of the story. So let's now stretch this out across Colleen's full 35-year retirement, not just the 12-year bridge to Medicare. And the good news is that the pattern holds. First, a general expense bucket growing at something close to typical inflation. And then we have a second healthcare bucket growing meaningfully faster year after year and compounding on itself the whole time. So as I mentioned, most retirement software defaults to a 25 or 30-year planning horizon because it's built around a 65-year-old retiree. But retire at 53 and that default horizon quietly stops 5 to 10 years before Colleen's plan actually needs it to. Now, it is also worth saying plainly that Colleen's version of this is not the only version. Some people bridge the gap to Medicare with part-time work or consulting work, specifically to keep access to employer-sponsored coverage, even if that means at reduced pay, because of course, the coverage itself is worth more to them than the extra income. And that is an amazingly good and completely reasonable trade-off. And for some households, it solves the marketplace pricing problem entirely. So the point, of course, is not that everyone must retire fully at age 53 and buy marketplace coverage at full price. The point is that whichever path someone chooses, the plan that you have behind it should be built around the real cost of healthcare and the real length of your retirement, not just the shortcuts that a generic calculator takes to keep things simple. So the fix for someone in Colleen's position is not complicated. Build two separate spending buckets into the plan instead of one. Let your ordinary expenses grow at a general inflation assumption, and let healthcare, whether that is a marketplace premium during the bridge years or Medicare-related costs afterwards, let those grow at a higher rate that reflects how medical costs have actually behaved over time. Again, they're historically running a few percentage points above general inflation. Then run the full plan out to age 90 or beyond, not just 25 or 30 years from the retirement date. So the plan gets tested against the actual length of retirement instead of the length that most software assumes. So for anyone eyeing an early retirement, bridging to Medicare on marketplace coverage, this is not an edge case any longer. It is close to the default. So the question is not whether healthcare costs will grow faster than everything else in your budget. History is already telling you that they generally do. So the real question is whether your plan was built to expect that, or it was built around some flat number that happened to look fine on the day it was calculated. Go back to Colleen for a moment, because her situation shows why this matters beyond the math. She had spent 3 decades obviously building towards that $1.8 million. She planned carefully. In her mind, she hit her retirement number. And still, she would have walked into a retirement with a plan that quietly understated her real spending need by tens of thousands of dollars a year, simply because the tool she used treated all of her expenses the same. She was not careless. She used a widely trusted rule of thumb and a calculator that plenty of people rely on every day. So the gap by no means was not in her discipline. It was in the assumption baked into the tool, an assumption that made sense for, yes, a 65-year-old retiree, but made far less sense for someone stepping away from work 12 years earlier, and then with a full decade of full-price health coverage standing between her and Medicare. And what changed once she saw the 2-bucket version of her plan was not her spending. It was her confidence. So instead of a single number that she half trusted, she now had a year-by-year picture of what her healthcare costs were likely to do. And this gave her a rough sense of how close she needed to stay to that $84,600 line each year, as well as a clearer idea of which accounts to draw from first. If you think about it, the portfolio did not change at all. The plan around it did. And that is usually where the real work of retirement planning actually lives. So before you go trusting any retirement projection, especially if your retirement's going to start before age 65, split the spending into 2 lines instead of 1. Everything that is not healthcare, and then healthcare itself. And in that healthcare bucket, include marketplace premiums or Medicare-related costs. Then grow each line by its own rate and run the numbers out to age 90 at least. I would recommend later, and see whether the plan still holds. And if healthcare marketplace coverage is part of the plan, check current modified adjusted gross income against the 400% federal poverty level threshold for your household size, and map out which accounts can supply extra cash perhaps without pushing income over that line. That single set of steps, splitting 1 bucket into 2 and running it long enough, exposes gaps that a single blended inflation number will never show you. If long horizon planning like this is useful, hit follow for more of it. And if you want to talk about your specific inflation exposure from self-funded health insurance pre-Medicare, click the link in the show notes or directly at connectwithbrett.com. We will stress test your retirement and how inflation compounding affects your real number. It's about a 30-minute call, and we like to call it our free pre-op retirement assessment. Until next time, take care of yourself and take care of your money.
This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. It should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. This podcast does not engage in rendering legal, financial, or other professional services.